So I have the privilege of getting to share with you about stories today. This is the last of our three-part series on Everyone Has a Story. And I love stories. I love that I get to share this because this is one of my favorite things about Brazos Point. We have a culture of sharing stories around here, right? We just heard Abby's three-word story. We've heard them the last couple of weeks as well. We hear stories every time that we have a baptism. Sometimes it's on the screen. Sometimes when you're out by the pool, you hear the stories. Every week, whoever is standing in the position that I am right now, they share stories with us, right? This is a part of who we are. What you may not know is that even on staff, there's a culture of sharing stories before we have meetings. That's probably pretty rare, but I love it because what it does is it shows me and reminds me of all the things that God is doing around me all the time. And if you're like me, man, I need those reminders. I need to see those things, and I need to take the moments and the time to pay attention and notice all of that. So I get to share today with you the last part of our series. The first week in this series, Randy, 2 weeks ago, shared about God's story and all that God did. He had this incredible plan and this design for all of us, created this amazing world and got things going and then put us in the world, and then we messed it up with sin. We brought death and destruction into his plan, but God was so good. He had a plan for that too. He had already planned and decided that he was going to send his son Jesus to make a way so we could be in right relationship and be in the kind of relationship with him that he had originally designed. So that was God's story. Last week, Randy shared with us about our stories. And he talked about how God's story collides with ours and it creates something in us. And then he gave us the tool, the three-word story tool, which is what Abby just shared with us. The first word represents who we were before we knew Christ and before we surrendered to him. And then the second word represents the way that we surrendered to him and how it is that we came to know him. And then the third word is about who we have become and what he is making us and what he's done in our lives since that time. So today, we did God's story, we did our story. Today, it's about others' stories. And so what that really means is listening, right? Because it's about listening to other people's stories. If you are in one of our small groups, as the discipleship minister, the small group guy around here, I have to take this moment to say, I'm so excited because we're going to practice these things in our small groups this week. When you go to your small group, we've asked that each one of you has your three-word story ready and prepared to share with the rest of your group. In addition to that, we're asking those of you who are listening to those stories to be prepared with some of the skills we're going to talk about today as far as listening. I think it's going to be an incredible time in your groups. I think it's going to draw you together. I think you're going to get to see the things that God is doing in and around and among the people that you're close to. And it's just going to be a really sweet time. I'm excited to hear what comes out of it. Those of you who are not in a small group, by the way, come talk to us. We need to get you plugged into a small group because this stuff is important. You need it as much as we want you, you know? We all need to hear what God is doing and be able to have people we can wrestle and talk through these things with. So that's what small groups is all about. So I'm going to be sharing this story, and I don't, believe me, I catch the irony here. I'm going to be, here I am, the preacher, the talker, and I'm going to be telling you about listening, right? It's kind of crazy. But I want you to know I'm preaching this message to myself too, because I'm not a very good listener sometimes either. If you don't believe me, ask my wife, right? She knows. She catches me all the time not listening. So what I want to do today to start out is I want to show you these rocks. These are rocks. There's nothing super special about them. They are polished rocks like you could get wherever you get rocks. I honestly don't know where that is. But they're just rocks. But however, these are not just rocks. 21 years ago, January 21 years ago, people filed into a worship center very much like this one. And as they came in, they were given one of these rocks. And during the service, they were asked to pull the rock out of their pocket or wherever it was they were keeping it, hold it in their hand, and to pray for myself and Miranda, my wife. It was our wedding day. And so I did this. I didn't plan on that, and it's never happened when I practice, but I got choked up the first service too. It's this beautiful moment. And since that time, these rocks sit in our house. And they've been in a vase or a jar or something like that. It's not been this one the whole time because I actually broke it once. I replaced it. What do you say? But it's this amazing thing because these are rocks, but they are more than rocks, right? When things are going well with Miranda and I, these rocks remind me of the commitment that we made that day. And they remind me of the people that supported us that day. They reminded me of the prayers that were, being said on our behalf, right? When things are going well, that's great. But it also helps me remember in sickness and in health, for rich or for poor, when I love her, when I hate her. I'm reminded of my commitment. And that's a good thing, right? That's a good thing to have these reminders all the time. They're just rocks. But when I see them, I don't see rocks. I see this commitment. And I see this amazing support of the people in the community around us. And I'm reminded that every one of those people that was there that day, and it actually, this is symbolic of you guys too. You are our community now. It reminds me that I've got all these other people behind us and supporting what we are doing in our marriage, right? Now, this is a beautiful thing, and I love it, and I'll keep these rocks around till the day I die. But these rocks are still just rocks. And if you just looked at these rocks and you thought, why has he got those up here? You would never know unless I told you, right? They're just rocks. The rocks don't speak on their own. They need an interpreter. They need somebody to tell their story, right? This is what I want to talk to you about because this is something that I believe happens in the Bible. I see it in the Bible. So we are going to turn in a moment to Joshua chapter 4. And in Joshua chapter 4, let me kind of catch you up to speed on what's going on here. Joshua, by the way, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua is the sixth book of the Bible. If you don't have a Bible, we'd love to give you one. Please stop by our Welcome Center, pick one up. You can follow along on the screen as well today. But Joshua chapter 4, what's happened up to this point? God's people have been taken captive in Egypt and they've been slaves for 400 years. God sends Moses to come and to gather them out of Egypt and to bring them out of the slavery in Egypt. Moses shows up with God's power, and God has the 10 plagues that happen, and then the parting of the Red Sea happens, and God has his people with Moses walk through the Red Sea on dry ground. You know the story, right? God is taking his people to the promised land, this place that he has prepared for them. After they cross the Red Sea, they spend 40 years wandering around in the desert. There's some other things that go on. But eventually, right as they're about to enter the promised land, Moses dies. And when Moses dies, Joshua is the guy who is their next leader. There's only one problem. They're not in the promised land yet, but they're really close. The problem is that the Jordan River is there, and the Jordan River at this time is actually at flood stage. So it's next to impossible for them to get across the river and into the promised land. But God gives them a plan. God tells Joshua to let the priests know that if they will step into the waters of the river while they're carrying the ark of the Lord, that he will make a way. And what happens is the priests step into the water, and the water from somewhere upstream just stops flowing. Crazy, right? But it's God. This is God's story. And God allows the people to walk across the Jordan River at flood stage into the promised land, right? It's a beautiful moment. So let's read, beginning chapter 4, verse 1. When the whole nation had finished crossing the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, choose 12 men from among the people, one from each tribe, and tell them to take up 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, right from where the priests are standing, and carry them over with you. Put them down at the place where you stay tonight." So Joshua called together the 12 men that he had appointed from the Israelites, one from each tribe, and he said to them, "Go over before the ark of the Lord your God into the middle of the Jordan. Each of you is to take up a stone on his shoulder, according to the number of tribes of Israelites, to serve as a sign among you." Now skip down to verse 21. He said to the Israelites, "In the future, when your descendants ask their parents, 'What do these stones mean?'" Notice that question. Their descendants are going to ask, "What do these stones mean?" And he says, "Tell them, Israel crossed the Jordan on dry ground. For the Lord your God dried up the Jordan before you until you had crossed over." Tell them what God has done, is what he's saying. "The Lord your God did to the Jordan what he had done to the Red Sea when he dried it up before us until we had crossed over. He did this so that all the peoples of the earth might know that the hand of the Lord is powerful, and so that you might always fear the Lord your God." He did this so that all the peoples of the earth might know the hand of the Lord is powerful. The Standing Stones story is so that people will know God's power and his might, so that they will know God's story, right? These 12 standing stones, they come with a story. They aren't enough on their own. They don't speak for themselves. They need an interpreter. They need somebody to speak up for them. This is actually, when the descendants ask this question, what do these stones mean? This is actually their own story. It's from their own people. But they need somebody who knows the story to tell them the story. The stones make people curious, and they make them ask questions. The stones represent God's work, right? And when we see God's work, we're curious, and we begin to ask questions. But the stones are only good if there's somebody there. They're only effective if somebody who knows the story tells them the story, right? The rocks needed an interpreter. Just like my wedding rocks. You would have never known if I had just showed you the rocks, not said a word. But here's the reason I tell you this. I believe that we have standing stones around all of us. I believe there are standing stones that are markers and hints at God's work, evidence of all the things he's doing all around all of us. I also believe that God gives gifts, and these standing stones are not just for Christ followers. It's for everyone in the entire world. We all are given these incredible gifts by God. Matthew 5:45 says this: God causes his sun to rise. That's one of his gifts. It's a standing stone. God causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good. And he sends the rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. God's common graces are for everyone, despite how they relate to Jesus. Whether they know him or not, whether they're committed to him or not, he blesses all of us. Randy shared just a couple of weeks ago that we were all created by God in his image. That's his first grace to all of us, right? We are all created in his image, to bear his image. But it doesn't stop there. He gives us more things than that. He created and he sustains this entire world. He makes the sun shine and he makes the rains fall, and he gives us seasons. He's given us a beautiful world that provides food and materials to build shelters, and materials to make cake, and materials for water slides. I mean, it's a good world, right? All kinds of blessings. He's given us a beautiful world that provides all of these things, and we're given different gifts, and we're given different abilities. We have the freedom to make choices. He's given all of us a sense of morality and what is right and what is wrong. God gives, and he gives, and he gives to all of us. It's a beautiful thing. He gives to Christ followers, and he gives to those who are not following him yet. There's evidence all around us of his work in our lives. God's common graces are given to everyone. We all know the gifts of God. We all have rocks in our lives. God leaves evidence behind everywhere that he goes. Sometimes we just need somebody else who knows the story to tell the story because we miss it, right? Think about it. Even the people who don't know Jesus, they still know his gifts. They just haven't made the connection yet to recognize the giver. They see the gifts, but they don't recognize the giver yet. And that's our job. We are the interpreters here. We're the ones that get to tell the story and let them see God's story, right? That's our role. That's why it's so important. We want to get them to see beyond the gifts and to begin to recognize the giver. Now, all of this in the context of our message series. We heard about God's story, and then we heard about our story, and this week is about the stories of others. So this is mostly about listening. It's about listening. So does the Bible give us direction on how we should listen? Yes. Yes, it does. So I've created a listening list. If we're going to be good interpreters, we have to be good listeners, right? So I've created this listening list using some passages from the scriptures. I'm going to call it the listening list. So the first thing, if you want to be a good listener, is you've got to be an engaged and trustworthy listener. Proverbs chapter 2, verse 2 says, make your ear attentive. Make your ear attentive. That means you can't be a hermit and off in your own little world. You got to be active and engaged in the lives of the people around you, right? Interact with people, laugh with them, joke with them, be involved, help, cry with them. We got to do some things to earn their trust. They're not going to share their stories with us, or at least not their important stories, unless they trust us. And in order for them to trust us, we've got to have true relationship and real interactions, right? We got to make our ear attentive. We might need to be a little bit vulnerable with them if we want them to be vulnerable with us. By the way, the most difficult thing for me in making my ear attentive, some of you probably struggle with the same thing. It's this right here. It's my phone. My ear is not attentive because I ain't paying attention. I'm lost in my own other little world, right? I would encourage you, make your ear attentive. Put the phone down, right? The second thing, if you want to be a good listener, you got to be a caring and concerned listener. Proverbs 20, the purposes of a person's heart are deep waters, but one who has insight draws them out. To have insight, we got to care enough to slow down and pay attention and give them all of our attention, right? I was a youth minister before I taught many years ago, and we were on a mission trip. We were in another country. We were doing some physical labor this one particular day, and we had gone out and done all this work, and we get back on the bus to head back to where we were going to stay. And there was enough seats on the bus that each one of us got to have, the whole bench to ourselves. So I'm sitting here, and then there's the aisle, and then there's a whole other bench over here, and there's this little girl, maybe freshman in high school, maybe junior high, honestly can't remember. I was worn out. We'd been doing physical labor all day, and we got about an hour-long drive on this bus, and I'm just worn out, aching, all of that, and I'm kind of zoned out, looking out the window as whatever was passing, kind of not even paying attention to what that was either. But this little girl begins telling me a story, and she begins to talk to me, and I listened long enough to realize it was junior high girl stuff. And then I zoned back out. And I didn't do that necessarily on purpose. I was just worn out, I did care about her, but I didn't really care about what she was saying, if I'm honest. So the little girl realized what was going on. She realized I wasn't paying attention. So she steps across the aisle, grabs with her two hands on my cheeks, and she says, "Listen with your eyes." I was like, it's kind of goofy. You can't listen with your eyes, but she was right, And I think that's what this is all about, being caring and concerned listener. To find the insight, we have to listen with our eyes. We have to square up to them. We have to look at their eyes. We have to see what's going on. It's not just about the words. It's about their body language. It's about their tone of voice. Are they sharing these things with you because they're deeply saddened? Or is it coming from a place of, strong faith? All of these things matter. So to be a caring, concerned listener means to listen with your eyes, right? The third thing to be a good listener, listen to understand, not to respond. Don't be sitting there thinking about how you're going to answer because you think you know everything else that they're going to say. You can predict where this is going, and so you think about your answer. You can't predict where it's going. You got to listen, right? Proverbs 18:23 says this, he who answers a matter, which is what you're doing, you're answering it in your head, getting ready. He who answers a matter before he hears it, this is folly and disgrace to him. James 1:19 also says, be quick to listen and slow to speak. It's critical. My mama used to say, you got 2 ears and you got 1 mouth, listen twice as much as you talk. And for me, I was a preacher then too. I have a hard time listening. I'm good at the talking part. Well, maybe I'm not very good at it, but I do it a lot. So here, we're at our fourth step for being a good listener. The fourth piece of this, it begins to change a little bit. Most of this stuff so far has kind of been classic listening skills. But this, it begins to turn. This is listening skills for Christ followers. It's not just for everybody. This is specifically for us as Christ followers. We got to listen with genuine care and concern, but we listen for evidence of God's work. We're back to the standing stones again, right? We listen to see what it is that God is doing. Jesus, in John chapter 5, he's talking and he says, my Father is always at his work. God is always at his work. No matter what situation you're in, God is at work. And if we've got to listen and pay attention to that, knowing that he's working, man, we should be the kind of people that are trying to hear and see what it is that he's doing all the time. When we can recognize the standing stones and what God is doing in somebody else's story, then we can begin to point them to the giver, right? When we see the things he's doing, the gifts, then we can point them to him and the giver. And I think as a Christ follower, this is a listening skill that we never really talk about, but it's huge. And it puts us in an incredible position. Ask yourself, what is he doing in this situation? Ask, what does he want to be done in this situation? The last piece of my listening list comes from a guy named Andy Stanley. He's a pastor, author, Christian leader, and he has a great tool, I think, for listening. He says, listen for the 3 knots. Now, the 3 knots are just phrases. If you hear somebody say they're not in church, things are not going well, they're not prepared for something. All of these are standing stones. These are markers that are telling us that God is at work. Think about it. If somebody is coming to you and they're talking about their kid's sports schedule, this is some stuff that's coming right out of my own mouth. If they say, we aren't really involved in church right now because of my kid's sports schedule, that's your hint. That's your marker. God is at work in this. First of all, they wouldn't have said that to you if they didn't care about church, right? God is already moving something in them because they're at least interested in it, right? But they also said this, that means that it's got a little bit of conviction going on. They're feeling bad about it in some sort of way. They're missing the community that they had in church or the connection to God that they had in church. God's work in that situation is the conviction that they're feeling. Does that make sense? That's God's gift. That is the standing stone that they're feeling convicted. And so what we do in that situation is we help them to make their next step from what their own words. I'm not in church right now. What's their next step? Well, get in church, right? Invite them to come to church with you. If they can't do that, then try to find a way to get them to help connect them with other Christ followers in other places, right? Get them the community that they're longing for. and step in those kind of ways. But we have to be listening beyond the words to recognize these moments and these standing stones. Second example of one of these not statements. If somebody says, things just aren't going well with the demands of taking care of my aging parents. Those folks are hurting, and they're probably tired and worn out. But we got to point out to them what God is doing. God is giving them moments with their parents that they wouldn't have otherwise. They may be tough moments, and it may be hard work, but they are moments that God is giving them, and God is placing them in the lives of their parents in this special way for some sort of purpose that we may not ever know. But God is at work in that, right? God's work also might be in this conversation. They have just shared this struggle with you. Maybe God's work is to reveal to them that they can't do it all on their own and that they need some help. Or maybe they just need a community, some time to get away and be involved in a community that they can be fed and be poured into so that when they're with their parents, they have something to give, right? God is at work in all of these things. We've just got to pay attention to know it and recognize it. The last example I have here of this, if somebody says, we just weren't prepared when my husband lost his job. Those people are feeling vulnerable and hurt, and they're not sure what's going to happen in the future. But God is there. There are standing stones there. God is still at work. First of all, I can say this because I've been there. I was without a job for a little while. And one of the big things that God did for me is he taught me to trust him. So that's one thing God's doing in that situation right away. God is teaching you to trust him in new ways. It could also be that God is having them out of this position because he wants them somewhere else. Maybe another job, maybe it's mission work, maybe it's just God wants them somewhere else. He is positioning them to share their story with some other people in some other way. But God, his hand can be in all of this stuff. The other thing that God could be doing is his work might be not in what's going on with their life, but in what's going on with you. He might be calling you to step in and help these folks because you have a connection to help them get their next job. Or maybe he's calling you and doing something in your heart to stir something in you so that you will give them a gift to help them through this financial struggle that they're going through. Whatever it is, God is at work. Jesus said it, right? My Father is always at his work. Anytime somebody says one of these not phrases, here's something else that you can be assured of. If they say one of those not phrases, or if you say one of those not phrases, hear this too. Listen to what God says to those people. He says, you can't do this on your own. You can't do this on your own. You need me. Draw near to me. I'm knocking on the door. God's work is he's calling them back to himself, right? My encouragement to you, listen with a purpose. Listen to understand and to care for other people, but also listen to interpret. Interpreting and recognizing what God is doing, this is how we care for others. When people bring these things up, they're not going to say, what do these stones mean, like the Israelites said. They're not going to probably even know that story. What they're going to say is, I just don't understand. And then they're going to say something about their story. Or, how did this happen? Why did this happen? These are the questions that you're going to hear. But I want you to know, if you hear those questions, it's the same as the Israelites. They're asking, what is God doing here? Right? And you are given this incredible opportunity to tell them and show them how God's story is colliding with their own. God is intervening in all of these things. Do you see it? And we have the chance and the opportunity to share that with them. We get to see this world differently than, as Christ followers, we see this world differently than the rest of the world. We see God's hand in things when other people don't. And we get to be the bridge between all of those things. It's important that when we hear people's stories, we attach God's story to it as often as we can. If somebody tells you a story about a near miss or a crisis that was averted, something that almost happened that didn't, they're probably going to say, man, I was so lucky, because that's the story they believe. But the story that we believe is that God intervened and he has something more for them. And so he got involved. Let's attach God's story to what they experienced. And in so doing, we are beginning to reveal who he is to them, right? It is our responsibility to guide others to see their stories through the lens of God's undeniable presence and his blessing. This is what interpreters do, right? Think about a language interpreter. They know two languages, and they are the bridge between them, right? And they are placed in the middle so that they can be the bridge, right? This is us. As Christ's followers, this is what God has called us to. We are interpreters. We, as God's people, we are able to see the world that everybody lives in, because we're in it too. But we also get to see the world that God is calling us to and the world that God has put us in. We get to see this. They don't have any clue about what all this means, right? But we get to be the bridge that's right in the middle, as an interpreter would be. It's a powerful and amazing position. And I want all of you to recognize that God, last week, Randy shared, our stories, we think our stories are no good. We think our stories are not worth telling. But what I'm saying to you is that God put you where you are. He gave you the relationships that you have, and he put you in the position that you are in because your story is the story that God wants to be told to those people. Do you see that? You are perfectly placed where God wants you to be for sharing your story and his story with the world around you. You are the interpreter. You are the one. They are here, and you see what God is doing and what he's done, and you are able to help them begin to see these things, right? And the more we do that, the more we stand between and we help people see what God is doing, the more they begin to recognize it themselves in the same way as a language interpreter. You, with the language interpreter long enough, you begin to understand some of the things from the other language. This is what we are called to, guys. We are interpreters, and God has placed us in this amazing position where we get to, maybe one day, we get to step out of that. Maybe we have interpreted so long that they begin to recognize God themselves, and now we don't have to be there. They don't need us because they have their own relationship, right? That's the goal. And that's such an amazing experience when you get to be in that position. It's a privilege, a real privilege. But it requires something of us. It requires us to listen, to pay attention, put our phones down, listen with our eyes. It requires us to listen beyond the words. And it requires us to share our stories, even though it might be uncomfortable. It requires us to tell them what we see God doing and to be bold enough to share those things. It requires surrender. And that's where I want to end today. Let's pray the prayer of surrender together. Please bow your heads and I'll pray. Dear God, I surrender my whole self. I surrender my fears, my assumptions, my comfort. Help me be bold and confident in you. Grow my love for those who need Jesus. God, I know you've placed me in the lives of the people I'm with. Let me love those people well, and let me represent you to them, and may you give me an extra ability to be able to recognize what you're doing in their lives, and then give me confidence to share those things and interpret what they see happening around them in ways that would bring you honor and glory. Lord, help me steward my connections and my story. In Jesus' name.